Everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode review here. So for this one here, I'm watching the episode after. It's season 4, episode 9. Episode is honestly incredible, and I was inspired to watch the episode because I saw that Denai Guerrera in an interview, I believe it was with comicbook.com, said that if you can go back to a certain moment or something, which episode would you pick to just like relive in the moment? Like, you don't have to go back and like redo a scene, or if you can go back, you know what I mean? Like, which moment would you want to go back to and just live in that scene again? And it was that episode. It was just sort of the process of all of that, like killing all of the zombies, Michonne in the end, obviously finding Rick and Carl. And I was like, you know what? Because The Ones Who Live is premiering in like just a little over 2 weeks, I might as well go and watch that episode and just see what it's all about. And I did. I actually went back and I rewatched the episode. I have a lot of notes here. There's a lot of things that I want to talk about because there's a lot of things that the episode was primarily focused on Carl, and I will talk about some of the missed opportunities. There's certain lines in here where I'm like, man, you really missed out on certain opportunities with that character. But for who Rick and Michonne eventually became, this episode, I mean, I probably should go back and watch previous episodes to see if there's anything else, but this is the first one that I've rewatched in a while where I'm like, okay, there's clearly hints right here of what's to come. And so, yeah, just a very phenomenal episode. And I do want to apologize for just sort of the quality and everything. I'm trying to figure out how to fix the quality of this. From what I'm seeing, it looks incredible, but when it's recording, it's coming out grainy and whatnot. So it's just, I don't know, something's going on with it. It's a little off. Also, I've been trying to figure out what to do for backgrounds and all that, and I probably have to change my room around because I do have this here. I have that poster right there that I would love to show off, but yeah, obviously that's very hard to do. So I'm going to try to figure out something. I could have probably put the poster maybe behind me a little bit more, like just right here. Yeah, I'll have to figure out what to do because I do think I probably could put up like a pretty cool set here. But yeah, let's just talk about season 4, episode 9. So what I actually really liked about this episode is that it does focus a lot on Carl, I guess, growing up and thinking that he's just like an adult now. He disagreed a lot with what Rick was trying to do at the prison, and I mean, a lot of people did, but Rick was really trying to keep the old world alive, really just trying to fight for that future for Rick, for Judith, for all of them, right? And I think that in doing that, obviously, he lost a lot of respect from a lot of people. There were a lot of issues. He sort of ignored the fact that the governor was out there. I think Rick now, if the governor went missing, like that's unacceptable. Like, you have to find out where he is, right? The whole episode actually opens up with this shot that kind of comes down at the tank, and right away I was like, wait, did I click on episode 1? Because it actually feels like episode 1 for a second, but then you start to see more of the surroundings and you're like, oh no, actually this is much later in the timeline and a lot of stuff has actually happened at this point. You see all of this destruction at the prison, and it's cool because Michonne at this point here is the last one, here, and I feel like she was the perfect character to kind of see all of this. One, because she was like the newest character at that time to join the group. Well, I don't know if she was the newest at that time, I guess. Well, no, I wouldn't say Tara joined the group yet, but you know what I mean? Like, she was there, she was just alone, she wasn't with them when they got to the prison. So she's walking through this, she's seeing all the destruction and everything, and she's just kind of seeing what was, and she immediately creates her walkers again. That was cool. Like, just to see that was like, after this whole tragedy and everything, she's resorting back to the thing that will help her survive. She knows how to survive a situation like this. And we do actually see Herschel's head on the ground. And I remember watching this for the first time. And this was, 10 years ago now, such a long time ago. And I actually remember specifically when I watched this moment being like, I can't believe they actually showed us his head. Like, I can't believe they actually remembered from the previous episode that this happened, because usually a thing like that, maybe you would see a prosthetic like that in like the episode where it happened, but they used that prosthetic in this episode. And what's so cool about it is like, it's literally a nothing scene. It's just a part of the opening scene. It's such a fast scene. Like, Michonne sees Herschel's head and then obviously puts him down. I guess, I don't know if you would call it putting him down, but it's such a really nothing scene, and compared to the whole episode, it's so random, but it just, those are the small details that I really like in this story. just the things like that that build up just the world that they're in. It does add to just the environment that they're in. It makes it feel very real, like it's not a set, like it actually is a real world. Like you actually see the governor laying there. Like this feels like it's really connected. Like it just the minor details like that. Honestly, like it is amazing. I also forgot about the Walking Dead original theme song. I'm just gonna point it out here. I'm not gonna point it out in like later reviews or anything like that because I just haven't heard that in a while, and so it was kind of cool to hear that. Or not hear it, I've heard it, but just like the intro and everything. I thought that was really cool. But then the story begins, and we do see Carl and Rick just trying to survive. The finale ended with them just escaping the prison, and they thought at that point that Judith was gone. That was just kind of it. Lori obviously was gone at that point, and they didn't know who really survived the prison. They just thought that it was just them as of now. Maybe some, people escaped, but for them, they just had to get out of there. They had to try and survive. And so Carl at this point obviously is very, very just frustrated with his dad because of just everything, right? And this is, we saw this building up prior, but after everything here and after them walking around for a while, it was on Carl's mind. Like he is just very, very annoyed, but just very just upset with his father for handling, or just how he handled everything in general. And I love when Rick's trying to tell Carl, like, slow down, and Carl's just not listening. He's just still walking like, I'm not listening to you kind of thing. Because you got to remember this episode right here, I think this is where it slowly started to introduce like Carl's realization of, what, my dad isn't always right, which in the end, obviously, and we'll get there, he does kind of realize that, no, actually my father, he's not always right, but I can see that he's trying. I can see what he's trying to do. I see what he's doing as a father. But obviously Carl, he's a teenager at this point, doesn't really understand that. And that's the one thing about this episode that you really do notice right away. And I think I get why people were so upset with Carl just kind of in general, right? Like back then, people didn't like Carl that much. People really, I guess, were just annoyed of the character. And it wasn't just him. It was all characters around that same age. And it was just because they acted like they knew it all, right? And so it can be frustrating. It can be a little annoying watching it. Like when I watched it, I was just like, and I liked Carl the entire time. I was never one of those fans that just hated Carl, hated him, just in general on the show and all the scenes. I kind of always understood that, just what they were trying to tell us there, that he was a kid and he's just trying to learn his way, in the world. And all kids at that age, when you're a teenager, you think you know it all, right? So that annoyance is supposed to be real. It's supposed to be felt there, right? And so for Carl feeling all of this, I like it was such a good story for Carl, and then in the end, the realization of, I need my dad. And there's also some connections here, I feel like, with The Ones Who Live. And I really wish, because of this episode, I really wish there was a way for Carl to be around somehow. Obviously not, but Carl is just an incredible character. And there's a line that he says in this episode that we'll get to in a second, but it was just like, oh man, like that line, combined with if Carl was still alive and then he thought his father died, it would have been just so perfect. Rick and Carl do find this building, and they go inside. They find this walker, and they're trying to kill the walker. And Carl is like telling Rick, like, I will kill the walker. And Rick is just like, he's at this point getting very frustrated. And it's interesting because, first of all, he's like, excuse me, kind of thing. And I like this part to the character because, I feel like we kind of view Rick as like I don't want to say the perfect dad. He's trying his best kind of thing. But like lately in the last couple of seasons of The Walking Dead, especially season 8 and all that, because yes, there was some stuff with Carl, but even in season 9 with Judith, he wasn't really talking back to Judith and all that. And maybe it's because of Judith's age, right? But, Rick is a very strict parent. And so it was kind of interesting to see that, like, Carl talking back and being like, whatever, I will kill the walker. No, like, I'm doing it. You're not doing it. And Rick's like, excuse me. I really like that because you don't see that side to Rick, right? At least not often. It would be interesting to see if they were to ever do some kind of thing in the future. I don't know if they ever would, but like where you have Judith and Rick now, and for Rick just to see Judith after all of these years. Last time he saw her, she was like 2 or 3 years old, right? Now she's 10 to 15 and somewhere in that range. I think she's like 12 for sure, but like I guess 12 to 15 in that range. So she's so much older now, right? And about Carl's age in season 4 or 5. So like, it would be so interesting and just so cool to kind of see that dynamic in parenting. And also, does Rick feel comfortable parenting Judith in that way? Like, what's their relationship going to be like? That's what I mean. There's a lot of little things like that that I feel like we're never going to be able to get into because the last scenes are just going to be all of them reuniting. But there's little things like that that I'm like, I want to see how Rick would parent her now. Does he even try to? I mean, he's been out of her life for like what, 10 years at this point. So it's interesting. Anyways, Carl is constantly, like, during all of this, he's constantly analyzing everything his father is doing. Remember, he's disagreeing with his father a lot, and I love the fact that they really focused for like the first third of this episode on just that fact. Like, this episode definitely has like 3 parts to it. The first part, it was just introducing a lot of this, like Rick, you know, being the more like strict parent and also trying to keep Carl safe and just saying very typical parent things. And Carl just being like, no, I don't trust you anymore. Like, you let a lot of people down and everything, setting all of that up. And then you have the second act, which I guess we'll get into right away. But this all continues actually until they do actually find like this house. And Rick does say, you know, that this house is as good as any. They break into the house and then they're checking for walkers and all of that. And this scene was actually interesting. So Carl starts to just like swear and he's like banging the walls and all of that. And Rick, again, gets very mad. And he's like, watch your mouth, or yells it kind of thing. But there's like this annoyance growing within Rick. Like, he's just getting so frustrated with Carl. I mean, as parents do, right? Like, because it's one of those things, I think, when you're watching it, like Rick, as a parent, he knows that Carl is right in some sense, but it's just Carl's attitude where he's acting like he's sort of a know-it-all, like he's acting like he's a grown-up and that he doesn't need Rick. And I think there could be parts to Rick in this episode where he's a little afraid, I feel like, to maybe lose some of that with his son. He doesn't want to see his son grown up so fast because you're not supposed to grow up that fast, right? But it's a different world now. And I think there's just some of that. So Carl talking back this and that, and I mean, Rick's in a lot of pain. He's almost dying, right? So I think a combination of a lot of things here is just making him just so beyond stressed out. He just can't take what Carl's just doing right now. It's just like, I can't deal with this right now. And so he's getting frustrated. And like, Rick views him as a kid still. He views him as a kid. Remember, around this time, this was the whole debate with Carl and with Rick. It was like, who was Carl going to turn into, Rick or Shane, right? And this episode seemed to hint that Carl was turning more into Shane, you know, that he believed more in what was, you know, I guess being preached by Shane all the time, which was, you know, technically a lot of us, I mean, talked about that to this day, right? Like, Rick eventually became a lot more like Shane eventually as the years went on, but not at first, right? Like, at first it was very much like, we're doing things this way type of thing. And then I think, I don't know. I think after the All Out War arc is where things changed. You know, once he met Negan, that's where Rick was just like, okay, I gotta calm down, because he kind of got too full of himself there, and obviously a bunch of stuff happened there. But Rick at this point, he wasn't there yet, right? Like Rick was trying to find his way, and he just came off of, you know, playing farmer for however long, right? He was playing farmer because he was just trying to give Carl the type of life that Rick had. You know, he was trying to give him any sense of normalcy, and so he ignored a lot of stuff. He ignored a lot of problems. And it caused, I mean, what happened in the season 4 mid-season finale, right? Carl in this episode does find like a bunch of video games, which I thought was really cool. He finds video games. There's actually this moment where he's like so excited about it because, like, I mean, there's video games, there's a TV. It's literally like the perfect kid's room, right? Like, if you're a kid, you walk into that room and they say that this is your room, you're going to be so hyped, right? And he just got so excited. He's smiling. But then there's this moment of like, none of this matters, which is funny because at the CRM, you could play some video games. So, I mean, obviously bad timing there for Carl, but it's the thing too about this whole thing. Like, if Carl was still alive, he could actually experience a lot of this. That's what's kind of unfortunate about the whole thing, is that he just never got to experience, you know, I guess what Rick has been experiencing for years now. And who knows where the story is going to go. Maybe the CRM is just completely wiped out in the end. I feel like the military will be, or there will be a restructuring of the government and the leadership there, but the Civic Republic will still stay, and so everyone can live a very safe life there. But man, Carl, it really does bug me that he's gone. He's the one character that really should still be alive to this day. And after this scene, I think, is where, you know, things really take a turn. And there was all this tension we felt sort of throughout the episode, but this is where it was like Carl is telling Rick straight, right? Like Carl says, I did this, and yeah, it was like a clove hitch, I believe he said. It was what Shane taught me, and then he says, "Remember him?" And Rick just like he death stare looks at him, and it's just like, yeah, I remember him. Something else you want to say to me? And like I was laughing at that because it was like an argument between Rick and Carl, which is just like, I mean, back then, yeah, I guess made sense, but now because we miss those characters so much, like it was just crazy to see that. It was just such a really insane scene, and I just enjoyed watching this episode because there's so many aspects to the story I miss, and I can't believe that Rick's back. Like just that whole thing, just the Grimes family story, it's continuing now. It's exciting. We then get to a flashback of Michonne. So Michonne in this episode, I talked about her in the intro. Michonne is in this episode as well, and there's sort of there's like two storylines going on here, kind of three, but two main storylines, and then there's like subplots. The first one obviously is with Rick and Carl. The second one is with Michonne, and a lot of what this episode focuses on in terms of Michonne is just what should she do now? She lost the prison. She lost, some sort of family that she could have had. Like, they weren't family yet, like she never had that connection with Rick and with everyone yet, but she had that connection with Andrea. She just lost Andrea. They were doing something at the prison. There was something forming there. She was starting to make connections with everybody. This was something that could have been home. Like it was the start of something, and then she lost it all. And so immediately, that's why she didn't seem like she was that upset. She just kind of seemed really like tired and just dead, like honestly, like almost like she was expecting it, like, yeah, of course this had to happen kind of thing. And then she goes back to what she was doing beforehand, right? Like she has the walkers behind her, and like then we're getting all these flashbacks, and we see her old boyfriend and I guess her friend, and then we see her son, and I totally forgot she had a son. Like a lot of that stuff you just kind of forget over the years. Like if somebody asked me, did Michonne have a son before like Carl and RJ and all that, I would be like, well yeah, I would know that, but just generally, I'm not thinking about that. I totally forgot about Michonne's life before a lot of this. It's the same thing with like Lori. Like I totally forget that like Rick was actually with Lori beforehand and all of that, just because we're so focused on like Michonne and just his current family situation, right? Anyways, this scene was really cool to see because first of all, we haven't really seen a lot of Michonne in a while, and I miss that character a lot. And so to see her just living a very normal life here in this scene was honestly kind of insane. I do like the fact that she was really good with the katana before the apocalypse started. That's really cool because like, I mean, obviously that's an incredible skill to have, but just adds to like how awesome she is as a character, right? And yeah, I feel like her personality in this scene is very much just what it was before the apocalypse. She's just kind of whatever, laughing about this and that. She's, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden she sees them, their arms are off and everything, and then it's that reality of like what just happened during the apocalypse. And this is all a nightmare. It's a dream sequence. She wakes up, she's in that car or whatever, and then it's just sort of back to reality, right? And this is why I do like this scene at the very end. We'll talk about that. Michonne does actually break down later on. And I feel like this scene here really was, in a way, her goodbye to her, like her old life in a way, and then sort of a introduction to like, I mean, eventually what would be her new family, right? Because it's kind of funny at the end of this episode, after going through all of that, she finds Rick and Carl. I do think all that was intentional. Like obviously Gimple wanted to have Rick and Michonne together from like, I mean, I'm guessing since season 3 or 4, right? Like that was probably the plan. I mean, ever since they killed off Andrea, because Andrea and Rick are a thing in the comic, I think around that point, they were like, you know what, we're going to go in a different direction. Michonne is going to take a lot of Andrea's comic story. And I think that's why they started to get into some of that here. Like, I do think a lot of this was planned back then. But the next morning, after all of that, Carl wakes up and his dad's out cold. Like Rick is just completely out cold. He's not waking up. I mean, we saw how injured he was, right? Like he needs a good 24-hour rest. Just let him rest for as long as he needs to rest. So Carl's like, I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to try and do things on my own. And so he does actually do that. And this was kind of a cool setup here for how Carl would handle things on his own. And I guess this was sort of the end of, or the beginning of Act 2. I think Act 1 would end with, I guess just what they set up before. And this was all the start of Act 2 here, where we do see Carl, now starting to do things on his own. Rick is just going to stay away for this act. He's just he's knocked out or whatever. He's just out cold, and we'll see what happens with Carl at this point. And so he does take out a few walkers. Afterwards, he does say, "I win." And there's a lot of little things like that it does frustrate me. Again, I kind of talked about this before. I can see why people were annoyed with the character a bit back then, because it is kind of hard to see a lot of that, because the character is acting like a know-it-all, right? Like, oh, I know how to do this, and I don't need you, Rick, or he doesn't say Rick, but Dad or whatever, right? Like, a lot of that kind of stuff, it's hard to hear, because you're like, well, you need Rick. Like, you obviously need Rick. And as a viewer, we obviously really respect Rick and we know what he's been through, right? And so it is frustrating to see a lot of that, but I like where they get to by the end of the episode, which I feel like a lot of people must have just missed that point. But Carl does say, and I remember this episode actually being a very, very big moment for Chandler Riggs, actually, just in terms of acting and all that. He says something like, "I killed 3 walkers today. I killed them. I saved you. I saved you. I didn't forget when you had us playing farmer. Lucky for us. I don't need you anymore. I don't need you to protect me anymore. You couldn't protect Judith. You couldn't protect Herschel, Glenn," and then the list goes on and whatever. And then he says like, "or mom." And that was like, wow. Again, I think it's just, he's a teenager, right? He's just sort of acting out. Like he's angry. Like all of his feelings are valid here, right? Then he goes on and he starts to say like, you just wanted to plant vegetables. You knew he was out there and you didn't care. And then he starts to get very, very mad. Very mad, and he starts blaming him for everything that happened at the prison, and says that he is nothing like his dad. He's nothing like Rick. I'd be fine if you died. And then he walks out. And I feel like this moment here is where you could have done a lot, had Carl survived The Walking Dead season 8. Because when Rick actually left the show, it would have been kind of insane seeing that, going back to that moment. And Carl could have had a moment where he's like, "I remember one time I was talking with my dad and I said I'd be okay if he died." Carl could have been just so upset at the fact that he even said that to his father, right? Because now his father's dead and he's not okay. That could have been a big growing moment for the character, because maybe eventually, at the end of that season, after dealing with the Whisperers and all that, he starts to realize, you know what, like I am okay. I will be okay, kind of thing, right? Like, I think that could have been a really cool moment to just sort of connect things back to. I mean, they kind of do it in this episode anyways, but just knowing the fact that everyone thought that Rick was dead later, I just, again, when it comes to Carl, there's a lot. Like, there's one line here, but I bet you I could find many lines throughout the entire series where I'm like, this is why the character should have lived. I don't think anyone expected him to die ever, like really ever. Because like, imagine Carl and Rick reuniting right now. Right? Like after like almost being gone for 10 years now, imagine Carl actually reuniting with Rick. That would be incredible. Honestly, incredible. And I'm just frustrated that we're never going to see that. Like, it's honestly so frustrating. We do see Michonne though. She is now walking with the dead, literally. She's just walking with the dead. And this is kind of what the story is like for her for the next however bit. There's a lot of scenes that we sort of cut back to. And what Michonne is experiencing here, obviously, is like she's going back to her old ways, right? She is just sort of just surviving. She's not living. She's just surviving. And I like the choice that she makes, when realizing that I don't want to do this anymore. So she kills all those walkers, and then she goes out to try and find someone to try to do something differently, to try live, right? And before we get into that, I do want to talk about the other Carl stuff, because I think the way this episode was structured was sort of, this episode was really, it was more about, like, there was some stuff with Rick, but it really was more of a focus on Carl and Michonne, and just them realizing certain things about their own personal life, and how Carl's realizations, affected his relationship with his father. And so again, he almost gets bit by a walker at some point. He loses his boot there. He does write on the door like, "Walker inside got my shoe," or "got my boot," or something like that, and he laughs. Oh yeah, it's "the walker got me," or "the walker got me." It's "the walker got my boot but didn't get me," or "didn't get me," kind of thing. And he laughs about it. Again, it's just that he's acting like he can do it all by himself. He doesn't need his dad, kind of thing again, right? So it's just kind of, it can be frustrating to see. It could definitely be, you could feel like, man, you are just acting like you know everything, right? And then, yeah, after this, actually, first of all, the pudding scene, he sits there and he eats a whole thing of pudding, which At first, I had no idea what he was eating. When I first watched this episode, I had no idea what he was eating. I know they said the line later on. I didn't hear any of it. And so I remember watching Talking Dead, and they were talking about that scene, and they brought up the whole pudding thing. Then I was like, oh, so that was pudding? And then I went and rewatched it, and I got it. But, I feel like that moment there, what I will say about a lot of the Carl stuff is that, he was wrong with some stuff, yes, but he was also right with some things. He was growing up. He did want to contribute more. He wanted to help more. He had a bad way of showing it, and he was really, criticizing his father and the way he handled things when he should have been trying to help him and trying to understand certain things, which he does at the end. We'll get into that right away. But I do feel happy that he had those moments of just feeling proud of himself. He killed those walkers. He did all of that. He got a bunch of food. He's sitting here. It's a nice day outside, and he's eating pudding. Like, he had a moment like that. He accomplished that. He did that. It's cool to see, just because knowing that he's dead now, it's just looking back at that, like you can just kind of feel proud of the character, like he did something, right? But then, yeah, Carl gets back, and then he starts to realize, he's just like, I think my father might be dead, because Rick is like making like these like zombie sounds or whatever. And I remember when I first watched this being like, what if Carl accidentally shot him here? Because there's such a long pause, and thankfully Carl is like, I can't do this. I can't do this, right? Because imagine if Carl was the character to be like, because he was that character the whole episode, where he's like, I can do everything on my own. I don't need you, this and that. So what if in that moment he was just like, yeah, my father's turning to a walker. I can put him down. I can do it. Like you're in that moment, he breaks down, but it's such a crazy scene considering that before that he wasn't that type of person. So thankfully, he kind of came back to reality a little bit here and realized, if my father is gone, I don't know what I'm going to do. I need his help, right? And so he starts to, cry and everything. And then he becomes like a kid again, basically, in that scene. And he's just like, I need my dad. I really need my dad. He starts crying. It's like, I can't do it. There's no way I'm doing that. And then Rick just says something like, Carl, don't go outside. Stay safe or something. And then Carl is just happy. And I think in that moment, he realizes, like, that's what my father's been doing for me. That's what, the stress that he goes through just to keep me safe every single day. I get why he's doing what he's doing now. I do get it, and I should listen to him more. I want to do more, but I get it now. I think he started to understand things a little bit more there. And I like the fact that he just kind of cries to his father, and he just says, I'm scared. Like, I'm scared. He's just crying. And again, coming back to Michonne, Michonne just went through this realization, and now Carl went through this realization. Now it sort of all comes back together. And then we're seeing Michonne in the house where Rick and Carl were at. And then, she breaks down also as well, because she starts to realize that, like, I can still live. I can still do a lot of this stuff. And I'm still here. You're not. You could have been here, but you're not, kind of thing, right? And I think this was her sort of realization of just letting go of the past and being able to move on. And that's what I love about the ending, is that she moves on, and she actually finds Rick and Carl, right? She finds Rick and Carl, and it's just so perfect, especially looking back now, especially for the ones who live. It's just such a perfect moment, because she sees Rick and Carl and she just smiles. She's just so happy. Like, I found them. I actually found, the group that I was with. Eventually, obviously, they would become family. But it was like, it was really a really incredible moment. And then I guess, like, rewinding a little bit here, because that happens at the very, very end. Rick and Carl do talk about just sort of everything, and this is how it wraps everything up here. Rick talks to Carl and says, shouldn't have risked it, right? Like, Carl says he was careful. Rick does compliment him, and just says, like, you found a lot more food. Like, that's really good. And then they laugh about the whole pudding thing. And I think that lightened the mood. And I think after resting for a while and just waking up, and, he had literally had a 2 nights rest, basically, right? So I think at this point, Rick was just like, and then he talked with Carl. He was more calmed down, and Rick apologizes, I think, for just how he acted as a person, says that he held on to a lot of that, a lot of just, or not how he was as a person, but just for how he acted as a leader at the prison. And, like, he held on to a lot of that because of, just things that he wanted for Judith and for Carl, and for, I guess, just how his family life should have been. And he tells Carl, you're a man. And they just kind of sit there and they have that father and son moment. And then that's when Michonne shows up. And I love that because Rick's the one who like opens the curtain or whatever and sees it's Michonne. And then he's like, oh, it's for you, like talking to Carl. And I like that because it's just like this, you know, Michonne and Carl were so close. And it's incredible. It really was the start of something so amazing. And I think that's why I really like this episode. This episode to me is the perfect episode to go back and rewatch if you want to learn a little bit more about just how the whole Rick and Michonne and, you know, that family and stuff like that kind of started. Like there could have been moments before this. This is just the one episode that I was thinking about because Denai Guerrero brought it up, right? And I was like, I have to go back and rewatch this. And I did. And I was like, you know what? I should do a review on this. And I think I will. I think I'm just going to do a review, give my thoughts on everything, sort of go through the beginning of the episode to the end, talk about what I think things are meaning, this and that. Well, a review, right? So I think this episode honestly is just perfect. And I remember not liking the episode too much at the time. I liked a lot of the Rick and Carl stuff because that was stuff that was building from just stuff beforehand, right? But I remember not liking it too much because it wasn't advancing the story, and I was so frustrated with just like, where is everybody? Where's everyone going? And then each episode kind of focused on like other things, like, oh, Daryl and then Beth, I believe, and then you get into, I mean, obviously every episode they were all separated until the very finale, right? So I remember not being a fan of all of that back when I watched it. Binging it now, though, obviously is totally fine. But back then, I definitely did not have an appreciation for a lot of it. I was just frustrated that I wasn't seeing the characters right away. So, yeah, The Walking Dead season 4, episode 9, After, really incredible episode. I definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't seen it in a while. Especially before The Ones Who Live. There's probably other episodes. If you do have like any other recommendations for episodes that I should watch before the premiere, definitely comment them down below, and maybe I'll make a couple more of these before the show actually comes out. These are very, stuff like this, I have a lot of fun making because it's very just relaxing. It's just me on camera. I can just kind of talk. There's not a lot of editing. It's a lot more fun, I feel like. And actually, I don't know about the editing part. I feel like there's probably a lot more editing. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, anyways, just let me know. But post all your thoughts down below. Hope you guys all enjoyed the video. And yeah, remember, I do have a Walking Dead The Ones Who Live poster right here that I wish I could show off on camera. But it is what it is, I guess. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching.